I've spent the last month watching and reading too much isekai. I've watched the good ones, the bad ones, and the unspeakable ones. And let me tell you, this iceberg goes much deeper than you actually think. And of course, we'll answer the question of why are there so many isekai anime in the first place? But before we start, I spent a lot of time on this vid, so consider subscribing. Thanks. The tip of the iceberg is what I would consider modern isekai. These include anime like Reincarnated as a Slime, Konosuba, Overlord, and Shield Hero, among others. I would say these are like the faces of modern isekai, and many of them come from light novels. Light novels are exactly what the name implies. They are books that are just much shorter in length. In 1970, publishing companies started making books shorter and adding anime artwork to them to appeal to younger audiences, and well, it worked. Nowadays, the most common light novels are usually romantic comedies or isekai, and due to their short length, light novel authors are able to pump out volumes much faster compared to manga. And of course, with mass production, the volumes end up being pretty cheap. If manga is like a Michelin star level course, light novels are like the McDonald's or fast food equivalent. Publishing companies are notorious for working these authors for insane hours, and the turnover rate is insanely high. An extreme example is Kazuma Kamachi, who wrote one novel a month for 2 years straight. That is really impressively scary. I would not want to be a light novel author. But as you can tell, this leads the publishing industry to constantly be on the lookout for new talent so they can churn out as many volumes as possible. And they do this by holding a ton of contests with prizes for aspiring authors. In fact, this is where the author for Sword Art Online started his journey. Speaking of SAO, whether you like it or not, this anime has had an insane influence on modern isekai. Really quickly, SAO is about a bunch of players who get trapped in a virtual reality MMO and die in real life if they're killed in the game. So effectively, they just start treating this video game world as their reality with the goal of returning to the real world. Because of the 2012 anime adaptation and its huge success, it's popularized a ton of tropes that we see in isekai today. Even if these tropes existed way before SAO, it's the combination of them that really stuck with the genre. But SAO's most influential idea is easily the overpowered protagonist. Kirito doesn't really have to struggle all that much throughout the course of the show, and even when he does at climactic moments, it's pretty clear what exactly is going to happen. And I've talked about overpowered MCs in my every anime trope video, but basically they exist to fulfill a fantasy for the reader or watcher, and everything they do is extremely easy and pretty trivial for them, which leads into the relationships that Kirito forms with the women he meets. Although harems and power fantasies in isekai are practically a given nowadays, I would say that SAO greatly helped popularize that. I mean, in the show, they literally made a character for each personality type, so the viewer can perfectly place themselves in Kirito and pick the best girl for themselves. Genius marketing for lonely weebs, though, I'm not gonna lie. And even down to the main character himself, you can find a million other Kiritos in isekai today, with huge waifu harems. But one thing that SAO has undoubtedly done different is its video game setting, which was pretty unique for the time. So let's talk about the more generic isekai setting that you normally see. If you've watched more than one isekai, you've probably seen the same setting a lot of times, and usually these worlds contain your typical fantasy elements like slimes and magic or a demon lord. There's usually this aerial shot of this generic isekai starting city as well. Like, I feel like I've seen this a million times, and all of these elements very clearly inspired by Sword Art Online. But it is worth noting that SAO isn't actually an isekai. That may come as a surprise to some of you, so let me explain exactly what counts as an isekai. Probably should have started the video with this, but whatever. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, yeah, isekai is so popular that it was literally added to the fucking dictionary. Isekai is a Japanese genre of science or fantasy fiction featuring a protagonist who is transported to or reincarnated in a different, strange, or unfamiliar world. Now, after hearing this definition, you might start realizing that movies like Spirited Away or shows like Inuyasha are technically isekai. And honestly, if we look at the more popular isekai, the reason that they can set themselves apart is usually because of their unique world. But sometimes isekai anime don't try to be different or break from the formula. Sometimes they fully embrace it while adding their own twists. And this leads us to the next layer of the iceberg: postmodern isekai. Just like how postmodern art remixes old ideas in weird contemporary ways, I would say the isekai genre is doing that to itself right now with what I call meta isekai. And one of the best meta isekai has to be Konosuba. We've gotten to the point where a lot of isekai don't really explain the premise or their world anymore. They just kind of throw truck-kun at the main character and expect you to understand the story. Usually the unique factor with these shows isn't the setting or the premise, it's their characters, their gimmick, or just the tone itself. And for example, Konosuba takes takes this very basic isekai premise and puts a really comedic twist and tone on every aspect of the show. Instead of getting hit by a truck and dying, our MC Kazuma dies of shock right before it hits him while everyone is laughing at him in the operating room. Instead of a goddess granting him divine power in his new world, he drags her down to the world with him because she's an asshole. They even use characters to subvert stereotypes, like Megumin, who is a super powerful mage but turns out to just be a nerd who can only use her best spell once. Konosuba subverts the isekai tropes masterfully, but sometimes meta isekai will play into their tropes so much that it loops back around to being meta, like Eminence and Shadow, which is about this guy who wishes he was Batman in real life by stopping criminals and pulling all the strings from the shadows. But when he gets killed in the real world and reincarnated, he's finally given a chance to make that happen in this fantasy world. He comes up with insanely convoluted ideas of a cult he's trying to stop that ends up actually existing in a really funny meta way. I mean, to be honest, a lot of the stuff he does in this show is really cheesy, but because it takes itself so seriously, it kind of just works and is fun to watch. But these are examples of the good postmodern isekai. There are tons of meta isekai that just suck ass, like the smartphone isekai, reincarnated as a vending machine, or oh god, the story of a man who turned into a pig. And we've officially gone too far. But unfortunately, isekai is so big now that it's not just a Japanese fantasy subgenre anymore. Korea has gotten their hands on it, and they've been cooking. So let's talk about manhwa. A really interesting subgenre that's emerged is the Otome Isekai genre. These are isekai that involve a person entering the world of an Otome game, which is basically just a dating simulator for women with super hot guys at every turn. The twist is usually that the main character is put in the villainess's body and not the protagonist, so she has to navigate the world without getting treated as one and possibly getting killed. This is really unique because, like most isekai, the main character starts off in a bad position, but by making connections, they have to improve their social standing to avoid the bad ending, and usually they end up super popular at the end and are overpowered but in a different way. A really popular Japanese villainess anime is My Next Life as a Villainess, but manhwa has really run away with this concept. Some of my personal favorite of this genre are Isn't Being a Villainess Much Better and Villainess Turns the Hourglass, although that's technically not an isekai, it's a regression, but that's a whole nother can of worms. But if we're going to talk about manhwa and isekai, we have to talk about the manhwa that single-handedly popularized one of isekai's biggest subgenres, that is solo leveling and gates. Solo leveling, like SAO, isn't technically an isekai, but kind of is at the same time. If you don't know, solo leveling is about people who live in a world with gates. These gates open to dungeons that contain highly valuable resources, but are also crawling with monsters. So adventurers go into the gates, they gather the really valuable resources, and then they trade it for money in the real world. Yeah, it's literally just MMO raids in real life, but this is where the lines start to get blurry. I would personally not classify solo leveling as an isekai, but also it does involve someone going through a portal to another world, and yeah, they are trapped until they can complete the dungeon and get back out. But at the same time, most of the story does take place in the real world, so like, is it an isekai? You tell me in the comments, I don't know. Regardless, solo leveling has popularized a ton of new tropes that you're gonna find in modern manhwa isekai and even just normal Japanese isekai. Things like a menu system that grants you upgrades as you level up, hunters who awaken to supernatural powers, and guilds who organize them. Solo leveling, though, definitely wasn't the first to introduce gates that humans can cross into and out of. Anime like Outbreak Company and Gate, well, really original that title, feature gates that are permanently open and even involve the Japanese military interacting with this fantasy world, which is honestly a pretty cool element, even though these anime are kind of mid. I love just seeing tanks battle orcs. The biggest takeaway from this layer is that there are just so many isekai that it's become insanely meta. Like in Ouroboros, the light novel and manhwa industry seems to just be reusing and recycling the same core premise. And of course, artists will copy each other. That's been happening since the beginning of time, but this kind of feels different with isekai. Like, why is it so normalized? And that's when I started to wonder, was the isekai genre always like this? And well, that's where the next layer comes in. Web novels, or Naro-kei. Although a lot of anime fans know about the light novel industry, most of them have no idea about the web novel industry, and this is where the progenitor of modern isekai, Mushoku Tensei, got its start, and it has earned that title of grandfather of isekai for a good reason. An otaku with no redeeming qualities gets killed by a truck, reincarnated into another world with magic. He becomes super powerful even when he was like 5 years old. There's magic elves, fan service. These are all super common to see in isekai nowadays. In fact, Mushoku Tensei also popularized reincarnating to another world, which if you don't know is known as Tensei. And portals, on the other hand, are known as Isekai Teni. It's safe to say that this was revolutionary for the genre and Truck-kun, as his kill count only seems to be getting higher. However, Mushoku Tensei was not a pioneer in its genre like many think. In fact, I would actually say that it actually perfected the tropes of the isekai genre up to that point so well that people started copying that exact framework that it set up, but Mushoku Tensei itself didn't pioneer these things. In fact, Rifujin, the author of Mushoku Tensei, has casually admitted that the climactic arc of Mushoku Tensei was directly borrowed from Re:Zero. Now, it's safe to say that this was pretty normalized on the website he was publishing his chapters to, Shosetsuki ni Naro, or Let's Become Writers in English. Rifujin has admitted to being very conscious of what other people on the Naro website were doing, and even incorporating their good ideas into his own stories. This is pretty normal for Naro-K, or web novels, and a ton of your favorite anime have actually started on this exact website. Overlord, Re:Zero, Shield Hero, Ascendance of a Bookworm, etc. But if Mushoku Tensei was taken from Re:Zero and a bunch of other isekai on the website, was there an anime or manga that originally inspired all these stories on Shosetsuki ni Naro? One that was even older than Mushoku Tensei? Well, yeah, and it's pretty rarely talked about to this day. If you're an older anime fan, it's maybe a show that you are familiar with. Not many people have heard of The Familiar of Zero, or Zero no Tsukaima, but if you were an anime fan in 2010, you were probably bullied. And you might have watched the show, which is considered to be the pioneer of modern isekai in Japan. Let me explain. Zero no Tsukaima started as this popular light novel series about a Japanese kid named Saito who gets teleported into a fantasy world. This time though, the setting is more of a Harry Potter kind of school, but exclusively for nobles. All the nobles are doing a summoning ritual for the familiars. Saito gets summoned to be a familiar for Luis the Zero, who sucks at magic. And if you're wondering where Eris from Mushoku Tensei might come from, look no further. Short and bright hair, physically abusive, massive tsundere, sucks at magic, yeah. This matches all the boxes. Once Zero no Tsukaima was made into an anime, it was immediately super popular. The Naro website was soon filled with an insane amount of Zero no Tsukaima fanfiction. And no, I'm not joking. As Kim Morrissey from ANN puts it, Naro culture is fanfiction culture. But why did Zero no Tsukaima specifically cause such a big stir on the Naro website? A huge reason is actually because Zero no Tsukaima's story is just so easy to write fanfiction for. Many authors on Naro would just take the basic premise of Zero no Tsukaima, but have a different character gets teleported instead of Saito. This creates a story that's really easily understood by readers without a lot of prior investment, making these types of fanfics really popular. This sounds an awful lot like most modern isekai that just add a random gimmick and expect you to already understand the story and the premise. The author of Re:Zero literally got his start by writing fanfiction on the website itself. In fact, this fanfiction was so prolific that the website had to outright ban it in 2012. This explains why so many isekai have such similar premises and general ideas. It's because this culture of copying and remixing others' ideas is the lifeblood of the web novel community. Mushoku Tensei, Re:Zero, Overlord, Konosuba, Slime, Spider Isekai, Ascendance of a Bookworm, Eminence and Shadow, all of these and more have started as Naro-K. So if you really want to pinpoint the origin of a modern isekai, you should look no further than Zero no Tsukaima. But we're not done, because a lot of these isekai are really tied with video games, menu systems, and RPG-like abilities. These definitely became more popular with solo leveling and Sword Art Online, but these are far from the first stories to feature video game elements. And this is going to take us to our next layer, because most people know about the video game influence on isekai, but just not how deep it goes. The Dot Hack franchise was arguably one of the most innovative and maybe even most influential anime series of all time, airing all the way back in 2002. It took the idea of isekai and added its own spin on it, trapping our main character Tsukasa into an MMORPG filled with a ton of other players. And because he has some pretty broken abilities like being able to warp at will, a guild called the Crimson Knights tried to hunt him down, labeling him as a hacker. This sounds kind of familiar. Well, it's probably because SAO has almost all of these elements to varying degrees. Dot Hack as a franchise was really influential to the isekai genre today, and if you want a spiritual successor to that specifically, I would recommend Log Horizon for how it really leans in more to its MMO setting. Now, if we really want to trace the video game origins all the way back, in 1988, Spirit Hero Wataru released, which involved a 9-year-old kid getting sent back in time to a video game like Land, inspired very heavily by Dragon Quest. Although this anime was pretty influential, I immediately saw the me 350 episode seasons and said nope. So I'm not sure about the actual influence this had on modern isekai as a whole. However, it's safe to say that it might have been pretty significant. But the next layer of the iceberg is about isekai that just removed this generic video game, slimes, magic, and elves that we tend to see everywhere. We're entering the layer of forgotten isekai. Now, this is a time when isekai didn't mean a specific fantasy world or archetype, but literally just meant someone getting transported to a completely different world. And nothing fits that feeling of a completely alien world like Gaia in Escaflowne. The vision of Escaflowne has a world that truly feels unique. It came out at a time where mecha was much more popular than isekai, and at this point, isekai was actually seen almost as a subgenre of mecha. It's got a steampunk fantasy setting featuring these biological mechs that are just so alien and otherworldly. And the music, oh my god, the music is absolutely majestic. Yoko Kanno and Hajime Mizoguchi went crazy by adding a cinematic flair to the world. And obviously, since it's animated by Sunrise and Bones, the mecha fights are just super smooth. Now, unfortunately, I watched the movie instead of the TV series, so the plot was kind of hard for me to follow since they rewrote 26 episodes of the TV series into an hour-long movie. But basically, this girl named Hitomi is super depressed and feels alone all the time. She's then summoned into the world of Gaia, and it's called the Wing Goddess, capable of summoning Escaflowne, this badass mecha. Now, let me just say, I'm not really a mecha fan. I could care less about Gundam, but when I tell you that Escaflowne has one of the coolest mecha designs I've ever seen, like, come on, just look at this. This is sick. Look at the way you just suit up into the mech. Like, come on. She meets Vaughn, whose older brother Lord Fulkin kills his whole family and is threatening to conquer all of Gaia. So basically, this ragtag group of rebels fights a huge army that has a ton of big ships. Wait a second. Are those stormtroopers? Are they using the Force? Yeah, this movie really just threw in Star Wars, isekai, and mechas into a pot and cooked this shit up. And to be honest, I was eating good. Personally, I think this is what a lot of isekai these days are missing. Where's the confidence in your world building to create an interesting setting for people to inhabit? Why are we remixing the same isekai concepts instead of looking outside of popular anime for inspiration? Escaflowne seems to tread that line perfectly, adding in a bunch of cool ideas until the world becomes super believable and fantastical instead of a cookie cutter template that we seem to get all the time. In any case, Escaflowne was actually not that popular in Japan, but it was widely influential, especially in the West, where it was a huge success. And a lot of American anime fans kind of see this as the quintessential 2000s era isekai, although nowadays it's much more forgotten. Not as forgotten as Fushigi Yugi. Fushigi Yugi is really interesting because it's one of those few older shoujo isekais that exist but no one really talks about. It involves our two main characters, Miyaka Yuki and Yui Hongo, who are two junior high school students magically isekai'd into feudal China by a strange book called The Universe of the Four Gods. It's got romance, it's got your 90s slapstick humor, and feudal Chinese politics. What more could you really ask for? To be completely honest, I could probably ask for a lot more. I watched for the first few episodes and it wasn't really my thing. Maybe I'm just not acclimated to shoujo series or the tropes, but I've heard a lot of good things from it, so if it interests you at all, check it out. Although there are many more isekai that you can consider forgotten, this next layer of isekai aren't just unpopular, they feel downright evil in their plot and characters. Now and Then, Here and There is definitely one of the more infamous isekai. If you've been in the anime community, you've probably heard of it, but never bothered to actually watch it. And I was exactly like that. It starts off pretty unassuming and honestly a little boring. Our main character Shu is just a kid who's dicking around until he meets his girl Lala, and then some robots come from another world to abduct her. Because our MC Shu acts like he's in a shonen manga, he jumps in to try and save her and gets teleported back to her world. At first, he's chased around the big ship they're all on, but something is off. All the people chasing him are just kids, even though they're all carrying guns. After they capture him and throw him into jail with this American girl named Sarah, they ask him for a necklace that I guess is really important. I mean, bro already dropped that shit like 20 minutes ago, but the king of this ship is a twisted man, and he basically tells his right-hand man, or woman, to torture him. So they tie up a 12-year-old kid on the front of the ship and just dangle him with no food or water until he tells them where the necklace is. And this is just episode 2. The next episode gets even darker because we see what Sarah has had to go through. Because I was streaming, you can actually see my genuine reaction to this moment. No, don't tell me, dude. No, dude. Oh, you gotta be oh, fuck. Man. This is when the depressing and melancholic music just sets in and you're just left feeling empty watching the show. I don't want to spoil any more than what I already have in case you want to go check this out yourself, but this show brings a tone that I have just never seen in isekai. It's so soul-crushing in the topics that it covers, like child soldiers and sexual assault, that I honestly forgot that I was even watching this for an isekai video. You know, at certain points it started feeling like a psychological horror. Oh, but we're not at the bottom of the iceberg yet. There is yet another haunting isekai that I'm sure most of you have never heard of and has an even more insane plot. Drifting Classroom is another isekai that takes a darker approach to the genre. Basically, an entire school is transported to another world that is essentially alien. Everyone in the school starts panicking, all the kids are trying to escape and leave school and end up trampling over teachers until eventually a teacher yells, "Stop it. If you don't settle down, this is what you get." He says this as he stabs a child he is holding in his hand. And this is just the third chapter. One of the teachers is tied up by third graders and then is stabbed with scissors. Some kids try leaving, but as soon as it seems like they can walk a few steps outside, they drop dead. As this manga goes on, it develops into a Lord of the Flies type of situation where people start hoarding food and killing each other. The lunch guy who delivers the school's bread sets fire to teachers at the school, killing many of them, including children. This is some of the most fucked up shit I've seen in manga form, and it is only worsened by the fact that most of the characters we see are literal children in an elementary school. Combine this grim setting with some of the most terrifying monsters you'll ever see, and this is easily the best and maybe only real horror isekai I've ever heard of. It also has some really good plot twists later in the manga that I don't want to spoil in case you want to check it out. I can highly recommend this manga. It's got this great atmosphere of dread that author Kazuo Umezu does a great job of laying on thick, and it was so popular that there was even a cult American movie adaptation called Drifting School, which honestly, if I had rented from Blockbuster back in the day, I feel like I thought it would be about Fast and Furious, but for like high school kids. But anyway, I hope you learned something new and maybe even found a couple of new isekai to watch that aren't just the regular ones that everyone knows about. Make sure to like the video, hit the subscribe button, and let me know if there are any other topics that deserve a breakdown like isekai. But other than that, peace.